Hello and welcome to another Giant Slayer TFT How to Play video. Today our analyst will be diving into how to play Dark Stars in patch 10.14. The patch brought a lot of buffs to Dark Star champions, so it's no surprise this build is doing extremely well right now in the meta. The trait itself is quite flexible and has 3 viable carry options, making it possible for multiple players to contest the build and still do well. With that all said, let's jump on in. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video, and to kick it off, we're going to cover the core items for Dark Stars. Before we get into the components and items, it's worth pointing out that this build has several carries you can focus items for. Shaco, Jhin, and Xerath are all capable of being the primary damage dealer, or you can mix and match all 3 so that you're not relying on just one champion. That makes itemizing this composition much easier than other builds, as you're not automatically pigeonholed into one champion over another. Alright, back to the items, beginning with components. At the moment, your best bet is to grab a sword off the starting carousel, as it makes into several core items. To list them off, you can use sword to make Deathblade, Bloodthirster, Infinity Edge, Giant Slayer, Guardian Angel, and Shojin. If you're unable to grab a sword, don't worry. Glove is also a great pickup for Dark Stars, as it can be used to make Infinity Edge and Last Whisper, which are fantastic physical damage carry items. Thieves' Gloves is also useful in this build, as it can go on multiple champions. The last component to look for, though lower in priority than the previous 2, is Bow. It's useful for Last Whisper, Rageblade, Runaan's Hurricane, and Rapid Fire Cannon. Most of these are secondary utility items, which is why it isn't necessary to grab an early bow. In terms of what items go where, the simple way of thinking about it is sword items go on Shaco, mixed items, which means swords, gloves, and bow, go on Jhin, and Xerath primarily wants Rageblade plus any AP items. Don't fret too much about perfect items, as playing what the game gives you is the most important thing to do. Lastly, there's a few extra items to consider. Warmogs can be fantastic on Jarvan, especially when paired with another protector, as keeping him alive long enough to cast is important. Shojin we've already mentioned, but it's good on utility champs like Ashe or Karma. And lastly, the Dark Star Spatula item can be used to hit 6 Dark Stars much quicker than you normally would. Let's move on and talk about core champions for Dark Star. The primary build we'll be focusing on today is 6 Dark Star, so naturally you'll need all 6 of them: Shaco, Jhin, Xerath, Karma, Jarvan, and Mordekaiser. As mentioned, Shaco, Jhin, and Xerath are all primary carry options, though Shaco or Jhin is most likely going to be what you aim for, as Xerath is difficult to get until later in the game. Outside of the 6 Dark Star, you have quite a few options. Ashe can be used for Sniper, as well as Celestial with either Rakan or Lulu. Lulu also provides Mystic, while Rakan is great for additional CC and Protector. At level 9, you can look to add in Thresh as a generally all-around strong legendary, or play an infiltrator like Fizz or Echo to pair with Shaco. Ultimately, your goal is to play around whichever carry you end up with. Shaco means you'll lean more towards infiltrators and CC-focused champions to disrupt the enemy team. With Jhin, you'll want to focus more on protecting your backline with a strong frontline and utility champions to keep Jhin alive. And at the core of all of this, you'll for sure want Jarvan, as he will carry you through the early and mid game super hard, as he received multiple buffs in 10.14. Next, we can talk briefly about the early game. Overall, the early game is relatively simple. Play your strongest board by looking for 2-star champions. Generally, the leveling scheme is more aggressive, especially since it opens up the door for finding early Shacos, or later a faster Jhin. So you'll want to level to 4 on either 2-1 or 2-2, following up with a pre-level to 5 on the 2-4 carousel. Or if you have 10 gold by the end of the 2-3 round, you can simply wait and level after the 2-5 round begins. It is possible to level slower, though it's a bit risky, as you're likely to lose more health than you normally would. However you wish to play the early game in terms of leveling, the best options you can have for champions are Jarvan paired with an auto-attack focused carry like Xayah or Caitlyn. Those 2 champions can hold on to Shaco or Jhin items quite well and make an easy transition for your build later on. Jarvan, as mentioned, got insane buffs and is one of the best champions in the game currently. Let's move along and talk about the mid game next. First off, leveling. Aim for level 6 on either 3-2 for your standard timing, or 3-1 if you're win streaking and want to preserve the streak. Level 7 can come at multiple times, anywhere from 3-5 to 4-1, but the standard and easiest time to go for is on 4-1 after the Wolves PvE round. Before we talk about going to level 8, there's an important thing to talk about at level 6 and 7, and that's whether or not you should roll. It's become more and more common to roll on 6, as getting an early Shaco or Shaco 2 can be an easy way to win rounds throughout stage 3. But make sure if you do roll, which will generally be on the same round that you level, you don't go below 20 gold, otherwise recovering your economy will take too long. Rolling on level 7 is much more standard and will likely be your course of action in most games. The goal here is to hit your primary carry, either Shaco or Jhin, and fill in the rest of your composition as needed. It's unlikely you're going to find Xerath at this level, so aim to play a 4 Darkstar build, catering to either Shaco or Jhin respectively with the rest of your champions. When you do roll, try not to all in your gold unless you're getting too low on health, meaning roughly 40 to 50. Stabilizing is your goal here, so just find upgrades for your champions in a primary carry so that you can save gold afterwards to get to 8 by 5-1. Now, there's one last option in the mid game, and that's to go fast 8 on 4-3. In a perfect game, you want to fast 8 with Darkstars, as that increases your odds of hitting Xerath. This is important because he is the last champion you're likely going to need to get all 6 Darkstars. Because it's only viable to fast 8 in games where you have a good economy and high health, it generally means you're already been win streaking. Otherwise, you risk taking too much damage between rounds 4-1 and 4-3. If you don't hit the upgrades you needed on 4-3, you're going to be in a really bad position. The exception to this is in games when you've managed to secure an early Bard. Bard can accelerate how quickly you level because you don't have to spend as much gold leveling. A lot of the games with an early Bard, you can even roll on level 7 and still hit level 8 early. Just keep in mind that this isn't going to happen in most games, and you'll generally only play Bard if you find him before Krugs. Overall, the mid game is where you want to flesh out your composition as best you can. Focus on either Shaco or Jhin as your main carry, while aiming to get to level 8 to find Xerath. While this build is popular and likely to be contested, it's still playable given how flexible it can be with 3 viable carries in the composition. And the last stage of the game is the late game. Here at the end of it all, your ultimate goal is to have 6 Darkstar, with your other 2 champions being filled based on what you need. The most common is Ashe and Lulu since it provides Celestial with Mystic, but Rakan can replace either of them. Infiltrator is great as well to help boost your Shaco. Speaking of Shaco, let's talk about Karma. Karma got a huge buff in 10-14, so you'll always want her in the build and tether her to whichever unit your primary carry is. The exception is when you have items on both Jhin and either Shaco or Xerath. Don't use Karma on Jhin if you can. The shield will keep Jhin alive, but the attack speed does more on Xerath and Shaco, so keep that in mind when positioning your Karma. As far as positioning goes, there isn't much to it for this build. Mostly keep your Xerath and Jhin split, while Shaco should be placed based on what you scout. Move him to whichever side has the enemy carries as you want him to snipe the backline. How you position the composition is almost entirely based on what you scout, so just move your champions accordingly. One tip is to try to have Jarvan and Shaco on the same side, so when Shaco jumps, he will likely get the attack speed buff from Jarvan. And lastly, for the late game, you'll aim to hit level 9. Thresh is a standard pickup as he's an all-around useful champion by pulling in additional units such as Urgot or Janna. Otherwise, you can fill in any traits you need based on the lobby. Fizz or Echo are also fantastic champions to pair with Shaco. Shaco 3 is an option to consider, but it may be difficult given how contested this build can be. Our last section for today's video will be on galaxies. We won't go over every galaxy, but instead focus on the relevant ones for Darkstar. Nicoverse and Trade Sectors are the 2 better ones for this build, as you can level aggressively to increase your chances of hitting Shaco or Jhin. It's especially potent for Nicoverse as you can use your Nico's help on an early Shaco to get a huge advantage. Make sure if you do that, you have at least 1 item to give him, otherwise he won't be as effective. Super Dance doesn't change the game too much for Darkstars, but it is helpful late game because you can fill in gaps in your composition. For example, if you need more frontline or a CC unit, you can easily add in extra champions like Wukong or Gnar. If you want, 4 Mystics becomes a viable option as well. Since this build excels in the late game, having more options is always going to be good. Binary Star is surprisingly not that bad for this composition, as you can focus on itemizing all 3 of your carries, Shaco, Jhin, and Xerath. This does split up your main source of damage, but since this build has 3 viable carries, being limited to only 2 items per champion is not that big of a hindrance. Galactic Armory, on the other hand, can be quite bad for this build, as the 2 items can be polarizing for players. If the items are AD focused, like say Bloodthirster and Deathblade, you can easily count on the majority of the lobby contesting Shaco or Jhin. Even though this build is playable when contested, it's much harder if 5 or 6 other players are gunning for the same units as you. If this is the case for your game, try to play to counter those specific items instead of playing Darkstar. Or you can roll earlier, like on level 6, and try to grab the units before others do. The newest galaxies heavy dwarf planet can be bad for Darkstars if you're relying on Jhin and Xerath as your carries. For starters, it's much easier for your backline to get CC'd on this galaxy, and secondly, Jhin is going to do less damage by default since the bonus damage of Sniper is based on distance. As we said, it's easy for your backline to get stunned or displaced, so Xerath is also at risk of getting interrupted during his ultimate. But it's not all bad news bears for Darkstars on this galaxy, as there are a few aspects that are good. With a smaller board, it's much more likely to have your Jarvan go off and buff the majority of your champions, meaning a huge damage increase. Shaco is also not hindered too badly by the smaller board, although getting him into the enemy backline can be difficult if they clump up. If there are players clumping up against your Shaco, you can work around this by grabbing a Fizz to CC their whole backline. That is going to be all for today's video, folks. Darkstars are super popular right now and easily one of the best builds you can go for at the moment. With just Jarvan, Shaco, and Karma, you can often find yourself at the top of the lobby. That's just how good the Darkstar champions are. Let us know in the comment section below which Darkstar champion is your favorite and how your climb has been going with this build. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.